Okay, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law were with their two children in Japan in 1989, and they invited us to come visit. So we flew over to Japan. Now, the first thing, our niece was so funny because she's probably 3, 4 years old, and the first thing she wanted to show us was the toilets, because the toilets were different. And so you don't sit down. There's actually a trough, nice porcelain clean trough that you stand over. And it was interesting because they had two ways you could flush it. If you flushed it one way, it would be just a little bit of water because you didn't need much. And if you flushed it another way, it was a lot of water because you needed more. And my problem was I was wearing long skirts, and so of course I had to bundle everything up so it didn't fall into the trough. And what I found the men had a lot of trouble with is that they would things would fall out of their pockets into the toilet, so it was a challenge. And so it was funny when we'd stand in line for the restroom. If it was there was one Western style sit down toilet in each of the public places we visited, and so people would see me and say, oh, and they'd push me to the front of the line so I could have the Western toilet because it was sitting unused. Strange and wonderful things. Now, it's interesting today, they talk about free-range parents and how dangerous it is for kids to be out. Understand that my nephew, at 6 years old, was going to school on his own, and that involved riding his bicycle to the subway, leaving his bicycle, then getting onto the subway, traveling a half an hour by himself, getting off the subway, and then walking to school. And doing that every day, all the way to school, all the way back, through Tokyo, which is one of the largest, busiest cities in the whole wide world. And he never had any trouble. And so what we found is that, the Japanese were really, really honest, and if you left something, they just let it be there. They didn't move it, they didn't touch it, they just left it. And if you left something on the subway, at the end of the day, everything would be collected and put in a certain spot with the date and the time and where this had been. And so you could find it again. My sister-in-law had gone to the store and she had forgotten that she, didn't have a car and she was walking. And she had this little girl to take with her, so she got too many bags. And so she had 2 big bags and this little girl. And so she's trying to carry them home, and it just got to be too hard. And so she put one bag down, took the little girl in the other bag home, put it away, came back, and there was the bag still sitting there with nothing taken. And so it was just a really interesting place to be. Everything, even in Tokyo, which was just pristine. I mean, you didn't see even a tiny bit of trash anywhere. I only saw one couple, one lady and her children eat on the train, and they were given a lot of dirty looks about that because you were just not supposed to do that. And, in America, when we'll buy something from a vending machine, we'll start eating it and walk along. In Japan, you buy something from a vending machine and you sit down and you eat it. Now, again, this is what my impressions from 1989. So this is not a scientific study. It is not to say that it's still this way. This is the way it was when I was in Japan in 1989. And I thought it was really interesting because homes were really tiny. And because the space, I figured it out, the space in one classroom here would cost over $1 million to rent in Tokyo for a year. And so you just didn't have much space. Now they had a lovely large park that everybody could use. But in terms of individual houses, you had an apartment, and if you did have a house, what I noticed is that they would have just a bench, and on the bench would be 3 or 4 little bonsai trees, and that was it. You didn't have more. Now, we happened to be there in April when the cherry blossoms were out, and so they're beautiful flowers all over this big park that everybody used. And the businesses would send the lowest ranking person out to grab a spot in the park, and they'd put down a tarp, and then the business would send caterers to provide food and drink and everything. And after work, everybody come out and sit in the park on their assigned tarp underneath the cherry blossoms. And it was just wall-to-wall people. And what was interesting is that everybody used the subway as transportation. You just didn't use cars very much. And I'll talk more about that that in a minute. But this meant that when they got out and they're partying or whatever, they drank quite a bit, and they didn't have to worry about drinking and driving because they went home on the subway. Now, as I mentioned, everything's kind of tiny. And so, for example, when you go to a gas station, the gas station is only as big as a car. There's no little place to there's a building nearby that you would go to pay for it. And there's no gas pumps. The gas pumps are suspended up in the air, and you got there and somebody would reach up, and there was always a person who did this for you. They would reach up, pull down the hose and fill your car, and you'd pay for it and leave. So gas stations were really tiny. In the parking lots, when we drove into a parking ramp, you drove into a parking ramp and your car was taken in, you got out and you gave them a ticket, and your car was put on an elevator and taken up, and then they out onto a turn style, so that they got on like a turning plate, and it would turn your car whichever direction it needed to go, so that it would then be put in and parked, and then you could get it back out later. They even had a parking ramp for bicycles. And so the bicycles were too high, and if your bicycle was on the bottom, you just put it in. If your bicycle was on the top layer, you would pull out a long, skinny little ramp. It would pull it out and take it down, and then you'd use that ramp to put your bicycle up on the second level, and you could use that as a parking lot for your bicycle. Now, we went out to a hotel, and it was just part of a family home. You went in through the garage, and this was at Kyoto. And we went there, and at the door, you left your shoes, and you got slippers. And so you took slippers up, and you wore your slippers up in the building, and you went to your room that was your hotel room. And they had really big, fluffy mattresses, a futon, and it wasn't in a frame or anything. It was just a futon on the floor, and you had blankets, and it was very comfortable. But when you walked down you didn't have a bathroom in your hotel room. It was down the hall, and everybody shared. And you'd walk down the hall, and then you had to leave your house slippers outside the door, and you would put on bathroom slippers, and you would go in and use the bathroom. If you wanted to take a bath or a shower or something, the shower was the preferred way. It didn't take much. What you did is you would go in and you would take a shower, and then if you wanted to soak in a tub, you would get into a very deep soaking tub, and that water wasn't changed, because it was just for soaking in, and you were supposed to have cleaned off before you got in it. And then you would get out and put on your bathroom slippers again, and then go out the door and change your slippers and go back to your room. And the futons were thrown over the balcony during the day so that they could air out. And that's what we did. And we had a marvelous time in Japan. We went to Kyoto, and we took the Shinkansen all the way across, and the Shinkansen's a very fast train. It would go 120-some miles an hour, and we would go through tunnels, and it would be light, dark, light, as we'd slip through these tunnels really fast. And what was interesting to me is that when kids would get antsy, their parents would give them little tiny pieces of origami paper, and it was tiny. They would be like 3 inches by 3 inches, and the kids would sit there and they'd very carefully, make these wonderful little dolls and animals and things, and then they'd play with them. But one of the things we noticed is that by having their children work with such delicate little things like that, they were developing their manual dexterity and their fine motor skills. And so one of the reasons why the Japanese are so good at making small things and miniature things is they start when they're really little, and that's just for play. And so they develop those skills that way. We went to Hiroshima, and I'll talk about that at another time.